I'm joined here today by my coworker, Konstantinos. Konstantinos is our local blockchain expert, and he has just been awarded a fellowship from Jack and Laura to get his PhD in blockchain and GIS. So I'm very lucky to have him here with me. So I'm sure most of you have heard something about blockchain. And even if you don't understand the underlying technology of blockchain, you've probably heard about some of the applications. Some of the things in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, right? But what is blockchain? Blockchain is a way to store data in a shared, unalterable ledger that records all the history of the transactions. So when I take a record and I put it in the blockchain, it's stored in multiple ledgers across many computers. So it creates transparency by default. It also provides us with a very secure environment. And that environment is allowed or provides the ability for us to make trust with all the participants. So we're probably used to centralized and decentralized network systems for the most part. But a blockchain leverages a distributed network system. And that allows them to create a process where there was no one authority that has control over the blockchain as a whole. So that creates that trust relationship between all the participants again. But when we start to look at the transactions themselves and supply chain, we want to look at reliability and integrity for a supply chain. And blockchain provides that by default. So what does blockchain provide us? It provides us with consensus. So there are no transactions going into the blockchain that aren't approved by the entire system. So it takes a multi-processed approach to get approval to put that transaction into the system. By default, it gives us provenance. So we can now trace back through and understand where something came from. And of course, because I can't change a record in the blockchain, I have to create another node if I want to update the blockchain. It gives us that immutability so that I know everything in there is always accurate. So, one of the things that we want to think about with supply chain in this fashion is that it's going to improve the efficiency and the transparency for our supply chain, but it's also going to improve some of the processes behind the scenes, everything from the warehousing and the delivery to our payment structure. Okay, so let's take a look at what spatially enabling blockchain looks like. So what you're seeing here is a sample application that Konstantinos put together. And we're showing a shipment that's going from point A to point B. Could be from your manufacturing facility out to a distribution facility. And as we look at this, what we see is each of these transactions happening. And the supplier, for instance, is putting in that transaction, what he sent, where he sent it. The trucking company is putting in where they picked it up, where they're going to drop it off, probably some information along the line about where he was. Same thing with the ports, same thing with the overseas shipping companies, right? But these transactions include with them the location and status of the shipments along the way. And since I have a perishable product that I'm shipping at this point in time, I want to make sure that it didn't exceed a certain temperature. So from an attribute information, I'm also tracking the temperature, the average temperature, and the actual temperature to make sure it didn't exceed the range I need for my product. Now, we can also take a look and understand where we're going here. So in this particular example, we're going to start in the port of Miami, and we're going to move over to the port of Rotterdam. And then eventually that product will move from the port of Rotterdam over to our distribution center in Venlo. Now, I mentioned the transactions, and I mentioned that we're tracking that temperature, right? So one of the other things you can see here is that we've got certain areas highlighted in red. So what that's telling me is that I've exceeded the temperature threshold that I've set at 90 degrees. So I can interrogate those temperatures, and I can understand if that's had an impact on my product. Overall, what I'm trying to do is provide that transparency that I talked about earlier, so that we can look at any piece of the puzzle and understand that provenance. So what blockchain is really providing us here in regards to supply chain is that consensus. So we always know that a transaction is valid. We've got our provenance so that we can always trace back where something came from. We've got the immutability because transactions cannot be changed, and that gives us our transparency. And we have finality. So we have one ledger system that everyone can use and everyone can trust. Thank you.